Hey guys, Jay Martin here, CEO of Cambridge House, and my guest today is the legendary Dr. Ron Paul, an author, a physician, a politician, founder of the Liberty Report, and really the father of the contemporary libertarian movement in the United States. Now, we touched on a ton of hot button issues in this conversation, from the civil unrest in the US, we talked about the pandemic, we talked about immigration policy, but really what I was trying to get from Dr. Paul was, what does it mean to be a libertarian and carry that sovereign mindset? And so we got into all of that. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It was great having Dr. Paul on the show. I hope you enjoy this. And like always, if you do, please hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and beneath this video, there's a pinned comment where you can sign up for my weekly newsletter, where I debrief all of these conversations that I have every week, share my biggest takeaways and my biggest lessons, and I'd love to have you join the tribe. It's a free newsletter and I publish every Friday. Okay, enjoy.
What I love to do is introduce the right people to the right people, assemble the smartest people I can think of or reach out to carry that conversation, and that's exactly what I've done today.
Please give my panel a round of applause. Welcome.
Okay guys, Jay Martin here, CEO of Cambridge House, and I'm joined right now by Dr. Ron Paul, former congressman, presidential candidate, and really the father of the contemporary libertarian movement in the United States. Dr. Paul, it's an honor having you on the show.
Jay, great to be with you today.
So I've been looking forward to this, and there's a ton of stuff I would love to dive into with you. You know, where I want to start, Dr. Paul, is looking at the civil unrest in the US, but more so the trajectory over the last decade that got us to here, and then where you think this could go next. Because you've been up close and personal in US politics for a few decades, always with a contrarian opinion. And so you've seen a lot occur and seen a lot of divides become reconciled, etc. Right now, what I see in the US, from an outsider looking in, I'm Canadian, of course, is two extreme camps of populists and an increasing divide and a complete lack of conversation between the two. And my question for you is, have you ever seen the US this divided in the past?
Not really. And philosophically, I think that is the case. I've seen and witnessed at times where the country was in worse shape, because when you think things are bad now, you know, I remember back, I was born during the Depression. I remember the tail end of the Depression. I remember World War II. I remember Korea. I remember Vietnam. And there were a lot of riots and problems, you know. But when it comes to a philosophic problem of the radical left and those who are their enemies, I don't think it's been quite like this. I think in many ways, on the surface, it's not nearly as many people dying from it, but it's probably more serious because it's so structural. And I've thought a lot about this. I've written a bit about it, trying to figure out exactly why this is the case. And I wrote a little pamphlet maybe a year ago or so, and tried to deal with this. And I think it's because of a bankrupt country. And I think, and I dealt with mainly the financial bankruptcy that we're up against, as well as the moral bankruptcy. And everybody's just flailing, you know, they're struggling. But the one thing they don't do is admit it, because there's a government that keeps spending money, and everybody gets bailed out, and everybody's gonna get taken care of. So they pretend that's going to happen. And they sort of ignore the moral crisis. That's not as acceptable. But when you think of all the debates going on in Washington, and the investigations and the charges and the elections and all these things, there's a basic moral shortcoming there. But also I connect that with the moral shortcomings in the economic system, because, you know, take, for instance, the money issue. I think that's a moral issue as much as an economic issue. Where did anybody have the right to counterfeit the money? You know, it's a tax. It's not a stimulant to the economy to help poor people. So I think the bankruptcy itself is what we're seeing. And I think that, you know, we're not nearly as wealthy as we used to be, and we're not nearly as wealthy as we think we are, because all we have is debt. So if you look at if you eliminated all the debt that exists for individuals, corporations, and government, there'd be nothing. So it's the trust in the money and trust in the system, and people don't want that way. They can avoid dealing with the idea of a bankruptcy. Well, in true bankruptcy, actually, bankruptcies occur in free markets too, and people either have to quit spending, reduce spending, get another job, or do what else. But they can't just print money and steal from other people. So it's something that people have to deal with, and they haven't been willing to because it's very unpopular politically. Let me tell you, I was in Washington for a couple of years, and it ain't going to happen. The politicians, there's not enough who would deal with you trying to deal with the bankruptcy and cut the spending, and the people wouldn't tolerate it anyway. So I think that's why the crisis is going to get much worse. And what we're doing is the turmoil has drifted over into a social turmoil, and that's why we see this crisis in the streets, and we see cultural Marxism and other things parading as solutions to our problem. And yet it's not as complex as it is. It's just a bankruptcy that we ought to deal with.
Okay, now I'd love you to, first of all, thank you. And there's a lot to unpack there. I'd love you to expand on the concept of moral bankruptcy for me.
Well, I think that our country was started with emphasis on a moral fiber in the country. And Adams said, as it was closing, as the convention was closing for the Constitution, when he was asked about it, he said, "Well, it's a republic," and Ben Franklin reiterated this, if you can keep it. But Adams was very specific. He says, "This won't work." He already warned it. The Constitution won't work. It's just words if you don't have a moral people. And back then, their morality and people was usually related to religious beliefs and convictions and the way people acted and treated each other. There were a lot of imperfections, but compared to the lying and scheming and everything based on lying and fake money and aggression and competition, all materialistic, that, if you want to deal with helping poor people, well, who do we steal from? We'll steal from somebody and give to somebody else, and that might get us some votes. So it's a basic morality that existed. It's in a partial sense, for many, many thousands of years, there was an understanding that property had value and people had value, and you didn't kill and you didn't lie. And these things have been around for a long time. But right now, they're worse than ever because lying is so commonplace, and you can get into trouble. You get censored. You get canceled. You get obliterated if you say something that is the truth. And the establishment, the people who have to maintain order and maintain power, they'll make sure you suffer from this. So people now have been so intimidated, and even we on our station here, we have to think about, well, we've been reprimanded and all, and I don't know how long we'll be on this on the internet. And so it's not a morality that's driving that; it's immorality, and basically it's an attack on religious values. And right now, there's been a lot of people over the centuries that believe that Judaic Christian values taught people to be more moral, and right now I think that's part of the attack. On these values, because they contradict authoritarianism. Everything is authoritarian now, and it's growing in popularity. Although I'm optimistic that the opposition is growing too, which is good. But it's something that is very, very prevalent, and people do not have the moral standards, personal behavior that existed at the beginning, and I think it's gotten much worse. And that's why it's accepted. People say, well, you want to talk about the money issue? Yeah, it's a moral issue. No, look at you. What are you talking about? It's a moral issue. Yeah, it's like counterfeiting. You're stealing. You're robbing people. You're taxing people. This is morality. But how many times have you ever heard a Federal Reserve Board chairman say, I'm involved in a bit of morality here and immorality, and I need to change my ways? It doesn't happen. Even the definition of moral standards is difficult to get people to agree to.
Okay, now a couple threads that I want to pull on there. And so two things that stood out to me when you mentioned the crisis will get much worse. I'm making the assumption you're talking about the civil unrest and the divide that we spoke of. And if that's the case, you look at the trajectory of this divide. You can go back to, say, 2010 when the Occupy Wall Street movement was created, and then 2016, two very polarizing candidates being Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, kind of the evolution of those ideas. And fast forward to today, you have extreme groups on both sides, QAnon and Antifa, polar opposites. But you're optimistic about that the opposition is growing. And so help me understand that a little bit. What's the future if the crisis can only get worse from here? What does that look like, by the next election or sooner? And what's the better case scenario that you're hoping for?
Yeah, on the short run, I think the streets are going to get much worse. There's going to be a lot more violence, and I believe that an individual or a company or a country that lives way beyond its means, and they get away with it with a false illusion, a false trust in the system, they will eventually have to live beneath their means. So that's what's coming. Right. When I think about, I'm very much involved in education. I have my homeschooling program. I support strongly and help start the Mises Institute. I think the understanding of Austrian economics has been growing and people understand it. I think in the 30s, there were free market economists, but not like there are now. I think there's a lot more. And even today on my Liberty Report, we talked about what they did in Arizona, that they were sick and tired of the lockdowns, and the people went to a school board meeting, and the result was when they let their feelings be known, they reversed and said, okay, we're opening up, no more closed down, and we're all quitting. The school board quit, and they elected a new school board. People have to rise up. I mean, I think there's a lot of feeling. I think people who are more decent-minded are less likely to be overly aggressive in pushing their ways. They don't really like to rock the boat. And so it takes them a while to get aggravated enough. And right now, people are getting aggravated. And one issue that I use a lot because it aggravates me a lot and motivates me is the whole concept of vaccine passports. And that is the use of the pandemic, the fake pandemic, as much greater authoritarian control. And it's a combination of the people who want a whole different social and moral system, as well as there's no real productivity. All this money, these trillions and trillions of dollars, we're not producing productive efforts in this country. And what's the solution with Biden? It was the same thing with the Republicans. Trillions of dollars are being spent, and that there's no proof that just creating new fiat money has anything to do whatsoever with increasing productivity and increasing the wealth and benefiting the distribution of that income. It doesn't happen, and yet the dependency of there. So the optimism for me is sort of the reserve kind of people that are behind the scenes. There was a time when people talked about, in the Depression, Roosevelt in 1932, he ran on a flaming conservative. But behind the scenes, the intellectual community was pushing Keynesianism and inflationism and United Nations and all this stuff. But right now, I consider what's behind the scenes right now a growing number of people. I was very happy to go to the college campuses, and things weren't as rocky as they are now, but they were still pretty rocky. And I had good receptions at even places like Berkeley, California, which were considered very radical. And I think the message of liberty can be spread. I think young people will respond. But I think also the biggest obstacle is the control of the social media and the control by government and the threats toward people who buck the system. And yet I think in like that group in Arizona, yes, they finally had enough and said, enough is enough. We don't want to deal with you guys anymore. Go. And I think more of that will happen, especially when the ability of this failed, immoral, bankrupt government can't take care of anybody. All they'll come along with say, well, I guess we better have another war. You know, they'll pretend that they're cutting back. Oh, what we need is war. And they've depended on that quite frequently. I heard members of Congress tell me, they say, you know, when things get tough, it's usually a war that helps out. George W. Bush believed that. If you look at what he said in between the lines, and unfortunately, he helped orchestrate a war, but we didn't get wealthier. We got poorer. And so it's an ideological struggle. And I think the remnant out there that remembers what a free society was all about, as well as the people doing groundwork right now, really have an influence, and they will. So I go along the line with optimism, but I'm not unrealistic either. I know what we're up against, but I think that I've been reassured that there's still a lot of friends out there.
Right. Now, what year was this when you're talking about going to Berkeley and getting the response and all this? What was the time frame there, Dr. Powell?
Well, I ran twice in 2008 and 12. I had a much bigger campaign going on in 12. My guess would have been probably was in 12, but Occupy Wall Street was going on during those campaigns, one or the other or both, and they would come in, and my staff would come up to me and say, you know what? There's some people here from Occupy Wall Street, and they're here to disrupt you. And they'd be in the audience, and they said, "Do you want us to call the police?" I said, "No, we're not going to call the police." So, but I knew who may be in the audience, and I would just concentrate on some of my firm beliefs that corporatism is the real problem that we face, or one of the biggest problems is corporatism and how the corporations run things. And just look at what's happening today, how the corporate world is all behind these lockdowns, and they're all for this cultural Marxism, and therefore, for some weird reason, even though I think I understand a little bit, they closed down industries, like closed down people going to baseball game. See, that doesn't make any sense. But no, I think the answer of liberty, making it a moral thing, a moral thing, and making it available to the individuals, young and old, but a lot of young people love to hear the story. Well, you own your own life. You can do what you want. You only have one rule. Don't hurt anybody else's property or another individual. But you get to run your own life. And if you want to have habits that some people think are bad habits, go do it. But you're responsible for everything. And people would respond for that. You know, I would talk for 45 minutes generally about how bad economics were and how horrible it was. But for 15 minutes, I'd tell them, it's not so bad if you believe in liberty. And they so often students would come up to me and say, well, what I like about you is you're an optimist. That's pretty good if that's what the answer is. But I am optimistic, and I think it's so positive if you think about liberty as a moral issue and the availability. And this argument's been going around a long time. In ancient times, they knew and understood some of these basic principles. Right now, the people in charge of our governments, they have short memories, and we need to refresh our memories about what a moral society is all about.
Right. Okay, there's so many great quotes in that, and really you kind of underpin the genesis for this YouTube channel. I mean, everything I do here is based on the pursuit of sovereignty, personal sovereignty, the sovereign mindset, I call it, right? And it's the understanding that no one's got your back. You have to do this on your own. And that's not bad news. That's great news. It puts the power in your hands, right? You're in control of this life, and you only get one chance at it. Okay, so one last question. You mentioned a little bit about the pandemic and about vaccine passports specifically, a trend, and you tell me if I'm on the mark here, if I'm way off, a trend I was seeing prior to the coronavirus pandemic, I guess on the back of the most recent U.S. federal election, was a relocating of people in the U.S. based on their political values. Now we're just seeing this in my immediate circle, my friends and my in-laws and my family in the United States. We're relocating from, say, Portland, Oregon to Nebraska, right, to be aligned with more conservative communities. And I can't help but think it was just my community in the States where I was seeing this. But now, this is probably become exacerbated because you've got very contrasting actions on the side of the states. You've got states like Florida who are opening up and saying, we're open for business, forget it, right? And the exact opposite of that spectrum. So do you see some kind of a vaccine and a non-vaccine economy in the future where we have actual populations dividing based on that and businesses that cater to that?
Well, let's hope not. This whole vaccine is a big issue. But I guess to a degree, because the lockdowns varied a lot, that's one thing that you might argue the case that the state issue, as imperfect as it's been, maybe gave us some protection. So people look at California and they look at Florida and they look at Texas, and there is a difference. But people should be able to move around and be helped. One thing that's sort of ironic, the cities that want to take care of people who object, the haven cities, what is the word I'm thinking of, the people that go and then they won't be turned into the federal government. So I think that happens as they're going to these states, different states and all. But boy, if the government's moving people by force, and sometimes when you think about, I don't know how much of this is true, but there were reports of, tens of thousands of people coming into our country and saying, well, we don't have to deal with them. And their main goal, which a lot of people believe, is to get more people on the road. But they put them on airplanes and fly them around the country, and say, well, here and here. That's why you have to get rid of the welfare state. And then you can be much more libertarian about openness and let people go and do what they want. But if you subsidize something, you get more of it. And that is the biggest problem with the immigration. There's too much subsidies for it, automatic citizenship and the many things and the plush treatment they get at the same time at the expense of our middle class, because there's debt made up there. And the middle class gets wiped out when you destroy the currency. So it's a complex issue, but I do think the more movement you have, the word I was looking for was sanctuary cities. They go to San Francisco because they won't get turned in. Well, what if we go to Dallas, Texas, or someplace and say, well, if you guys come here, we will never turn you over to the federal authorities for you owning a gun. Maybe the principle might not be all that bad. It's a little bit discouraging in that if it's only used to obey laws that might be not quite as onerous. But I think the more movement, the better we have it. And the independence, I love the goals that you have in your program, because self-government is it. And I tell people that, and I'm sure you do too. And that is, you own your own life. That's why I think individuals like you, we have not known each other, but I am delighted you're there. But there are thousands of people like you, and a lot of them, I'll ask them, they'll have a program and they'll be way ahead of me in distribution of information. I say, how'd you get started on this? I heard you speak in 2008. So there's people out there. There's people who have already been in that category and knew what was going on, but there's also people being invited and they're moving into it. And the important thing is they can't be discouraged because they can't win every election with 60% of the vote. That is very secondary. You want consensus by the people, but what you want is leadership, people who are leaders, and that will be in the whether you're in an investment business, newsletter writing movies, writing stories, reporters, or whatever, there's always a goal. I would be asked the question so often by individuals on college campus, okay, I agree with you, Dr. Paul. Tell me what I have to do. I said, whatever you want. Everybody has their do it different. What you're doing is, Jay, is something you probably decided to do. But I think that is so important. But ownership of one's life is very, very important. But the big thing that I was surprised I get a lot of applause with is that if you have self-ownership and you can do what you want and things don't go well, you have no right to go to the government, become a victim, and demand they take care of you. And I would get just as loud of applause for that as saying it's your life and you should take care of your own life.
100%. Yeah. Own your decisions, own the consequences. Exactly. I love that. I love that. You mentioned leadership, and I found myself wondering, I guess this is not a novel thought, but is it even possible to elect a leader in a country the size of the United States? One leader. And I just feel like the whole concept is flawed. There's never going to be a resolution when you have the binary opinion of one individual trying to lead a country of that size. Do you ever get to a place? Could you ever get to a place? If you look at what the U.S. has become, and I understand it's very different from when it was founded, but today, looking at what the U.S. is, can there ever be a positive outcome with a one leader government?
No, probably not. And I don't look toward the political system, even though I was involved with it. That to me was just a way that I could speak out. I got into politics after the breakdown of the Bretton Woods in 1971. Right. And it was just a vehicle. It wasn't to become chairman of the banking committee. I was there a long time, and if I had played by their rules, I could have become chairman, but I would have had to sell everything I believed to join the gang. So no, they're not really relevant. The people who are relevant are the people who deal in ideas and have a vehicle for spreading that message. And everybody, the first obligation is for people to do their best to understand. And I feel like I continuously do this, try to understand why there's chaos in the streets and where are the flaws and what is the philosophy and how can I better explain the fiat money and how do you deal with cryptocurrencies and all these things. So you want to keep learning how to do it. Then once you think you understand it, then you have to think of ways how to persuade people. I mean, that's what investors do. If you're in the investment business, you have to tell them something, get them to understand, and then you have to persuade them. That's the way with ideas, too. You have to persuade people to accept them. But that's where I get a little bit excited about it because I think it's so wonderful that the messages do spread, and they're spreading a lot more than people realize because they're not going to report us on the evening news and say, hey, look at what somebody did. We're lucky if you read too much, hardly anything about a group of people like in Arizona that had a vote and got rid of their school board and said, we want our kids back in school and we're getting rid of you. So it's out there. I think it's happening. It's just discouraging when you see how powerful they are, but they're still controlling the money. And that's the biggest thing they control now. It's through the financial system. It's through the Federal Reserve. It's the fiat system. But that's coming to an end. So I see that as an opportunity because everybody might be made more equal, but it's also very dangerous. But that's also the reason why I want people to be prepared. So if things get half as bad as I think they could be, you might need to have some alternatives because they're going to, if they're going to put passports, vaccine passports on us, they're going to know everything about you. I mean, if Roosevelt in 1933 was so bold as to say, well, we're in a crisis now, you give the government all your gold. You can imagine what it's going to be like now. So there's no easy haven. I'm still much involved in gold. I still go to cryptocurrency meetings and to talk about it. But I tell you what, there's none of that is going to be saved if you don't have enough people that agree that the issue is whether or not you have liberty and self-reliance and responsibility for yourself. That is what will really count, not getting a few more people in the Congress that's going to vote to control the Federal Reserve. Right. Nobody in Congress even knows how the Federal Reserve works, really. Got it.
Okay. Now you mentioned the end of the fiat system. So, at a high level, walk me through what that could look like, Dr. Paul, when you envision that. What's happening and what does it look like on the other end?
Well, you got a taste of it in the morning news today. There were two reports. One said that lumber prices for a single house last year went up $36,000. Somebody else reported $80,000. All these houses are going up because the cost of lumber is going up. No, the value of the dollar is going down. And if you look at the inflation is breaking out. The price inflation is breaking out. And the stupidity of it all is what our job should be, is that last week, the Federal Reserve Board chairman said, well, we just had a meeting and it's still in place. Our goal is still to get the prices going up more. We've been aiming for 2, but now we're really aiming for more than 2 to get the prices going up. Well, he's talking about a thief. He's stealing from people. He's stealing the value of the money. So, no, it's coming to an end and it can accelerate. And I remember the time I got interested in all this was in the 70s, and that was crazy. Interest rates up to 21% and prices going up 15%. So that's coming. But I think you're here seeing the early signs of that. But it's the lack of the functioning of money, and everybody will be screaming, there's not enough money. The poor people and the rich people already are screaming. And that's why all these bailouts of $1 trillion are going to the very wealth corporations and the banks and the governments of the world. Everybody's short of money. What they're short of is value, and the value of a currency and a stable currency and a free market economy. That's what they should be talking about.
Okay. Now,
okay. Pretty soon.
Okay, so let's talk about when you said you encourage people to be prepared. You know, it's tough to know, and there's no answer, right? You can ask people what they think will happen, but none of us know, you know, and it's definitely, I find that I feel like we're in a very high stakes situation here. And what advice do you have for people, Dr. Paul, to be prepared, to just hedge your bets and remain whether sovereign or safe, you know, in a very unpredictable collapse? Something as bad as that.
I think the first thing is be informed, which means studying. And as bad as the internet is, it's still information. Be informed, and then I think the next thing you have to do is talk about the issues of big problems coming, and certainly have allies and that might work with you and think about an emergency. But you also have to help spread the message, because your investment has to be in spreading the message. Because if the numbers of people who know and understand the truth are too small, it'll be a blip and it won't work. But if those numbers grow, not to the huge number of 50%, but 8% of the people can cause a revolution. And I'm thinking of a revolution in a positive way. So that was the case, at the time of our revolution. But after that, the immediate thing will vary. It depends on where you live, what city you're in, where you want to go. Some people move out of the country. Some people buy gold and silver, become self-sufficient, and they become independent. But I think all those things. But I do think that the most important thing is trying to protect a society where you're allowed to take care of yourself and not depend on the government. But the government can't take care of us, and that to me is the important thing. But I don't, when it comes down to investments, I a long time ago gave up on just buying stocks. And people say, yeah, look at it. The stock market's gigantic. Look at where it's going. Yeah, but that just is a representation of the dollar warning us the dollar is crashing. If you can't buy your stock except when you pay these huge amounts, that means there's a lot of inflation out there. But people say, oh, no, there's no inflation. The CPI only went up so-and-so last year. So they say there's no inflation. The inflation is when they print the money. And you read every day how many trillions of dollars are going to be printed continuously. Yeah, interesting. Look, that's such sage advice. I really appreciate it, because, I asked you from a point of, what might you do personally? That's what I was thinking. And, so buy gold, buy Bitcoin, stay in cash, depending on your view there, get into real estate, whatever. And you came back with really a more community focused answer, and the importance of educating people, informing people, and spreading the message. And that really speaks to your entire career and what you've dedicated your life towards.
Dr. Powell, look, this has been a real honor. Thank you so much for making the time and coming on the show. And I'm so happy to get you in front of my audience. I know they're enjoying this. So I want to thank you once again for your time.
Very good. It was nice being with you.
As always, if you enjoy this content, please hit subscribe. I'd love to have you on the team. And if you want to take the next step and go a bit deeper with my content, I publish a free weekly newsletter every Friday where I debrief my portfolio. I distill the top lessons I've uncovered from the guests I've had on this show every week. And I talk about sectors and industries that I think are poised to move, areas that I'm looking for opportunity, and places that I'm allocating capital. I love writing it. We publish every Friday. The link is right beneath this video. Love to have you join the tribe.